In the 1920s, police funding increased by $14 million. Arrests for prohibition violations increased by 102%. Arrests for drunkenness increased by 41%. Arrests for drunk drivers increased by 81%. Thefts and burglaries increased by 9%. And homicides and assaults increased by 13%. The number of federal convicts went up by 561%, and the federal prison population increased by 366. During this time, the total federal expeditions increased by 1,000%. Bootlegging is the illegal traffic of liquor in violation of the legislative restrictions on the manufacture, sale, or transportation of alcohol. The term came about in the Midwest in the 1880s to denote the practice of concealing flasks of illicit liquor in boot tops.
Most people have heard of the notorious gangster Al Capone, but have you learned of the history of this man? This man grew up in Brooklyn, New York, and while a youngster, he joined two kid gangs, the Brooklyn Rippers and the 40 Thieves Jr. He quit school at 14 in 6th grade to pursue his new life in crime. He earned money by working at the Harvard Inn, and while there, he insulted a patron and was attacked by her brother. This resulted in him receiving a scar on his face, and thus him receiving the nickname Scarface. Later on in his life, he married Mary Mae Coughlin. To prove himself, he killed 2 men and hospitalized a rival gang member. To avoid arrest, he moved to Chicago. In Chicago, he met Torrio, the head of a large gang, and gained Torrio's interest. By mid-1922, Capone ranked as Torrio's number 2 man and eventually became his partner. Eventually and ironically, he was caught for tax evasion and served 7 years, 6 months, and 15 days. He was released and became mentally and physically ill and died on January 25, 1947. An interesting quote to remember Al Capone by is, "You can get much farther with a kind word and a gun than you can with a kind word alone." At the time of Al Capone, there were many other gangsters, and it was hard for police to stop them when corruption existed in their force. Under Mayor William Hale Thompson of Chicago, Chicago was an open town for bootlegging advice. This meant that police were very easy to be paid off by gangsters. A new administration from 1923 to 1927 attempted to suppress bootlegging, but the number of murders only rose, and Mayor William Hale took office again. According to Tripod.com, Chicago PD had about 80% to 90% of officers on someone else's payroll.
In the presidential term of Warren G. Harding, many mistakes were made on behalf of the president and his administration, the most famous being the Teapot Dome scandal, in which Secretary of the Interior Albert B. Fall leased petroleum locations owned by the Navy to private oil companies for personal gain. Senator Thomas J. Walsh led the investigation and convicted Fall of bribery. The Teapot Dome scandal is known as the second greatest scandal in the history of America, only behind Watergate.